Great Flood and the End of the Nephilim. Have you ever heard of the Nephilim? Mysterious giants, beings of tremendous strength and enigmatic origin, who supposedly lived on Earth before the Great Flood. Many know the story of Noah's Ark, but few know what was really happening in the world before the waters swallowed everything. Who dared to challenge the heavens? And what did the Nephilim have to do with the destruction of all humanity? If this story already provokes your curiosity, stay until the end. Because today you will discover a rarely told narrative, almost forbidden, about the secrets of the antediluvian world and the final destiny of the Nephilim. The world before the flood. Long before the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, the world was already plunged into chaos. Humanity had multiplied, and with it, wickedness. The book of Genesis chapter 6 describes that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all whom they chose. From this union were born the Nephilim, giants, warriors of renown, described as violent and powerful men. The earth was filled with corruption and violence. It wasn't just ordinary human wickedness, but something different, something dark, that seemed to challenge the limits of what God had established for creation. But who were these mysterious beings that filled the ancient world with terror? What made them so different from ordinary humans that their very existence became a catalyst for divine judgment? Who were the Nephilim? The word Nephilim comes from Hebrew and can mean fallen ones or giants. Some interpreters claim they were the result of the union between fallen angels and human women, creating hybrid beings, different from anything that had ever existed. Others argue they were simply cruel and bloodthirsty human warriors, descendants of families who used power and violence to dominate. What is certain is that the Nephilim became a symbol of the decadence of a world that was heading toward its end. They filled the earth with violence and destruction. The spilled blood cried out to heaven. These weren't just tall people or strong warriors. Ancient texts describe beings whose very presence changed the course of human history. They possessed knowledge that shouldn't belong to mortals, strength that defied natural laws, and an appetite for destruction that seemed insatiable. Can you imagine living in a world where such beings walked among ordinary people? Where might was the only right and where the strong preyed upon the weak without consequence? This was the reality of the antediluvian world. The judgment announced. It was in this scenario that God decided to put an end to it all. The biblical text is direct. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. In other words, there was no turning back. Corruption had reached such a point that even creation itself was in danger. It was necessary to start over. And so, God chose a righteous man, Noah, to build an ark and preserve life. But think about this for a moment. What does it take for the creator of the universe to decide that his own creation must be destroyed? What level of corruption and violence had humanity reached that even divine patience had its limits? The earth had become a battlefield where giants ruled through fear, where human dignity was trampled, and where the very concept of justice had been perverted beyond recognition. Every day brought new horrors, new displays of cruelty that seemed to have no end. The construction of hope. While the world descended deeper into darkness, one man received a divine command that must have seemed impossible. Build a massive ark, far from any sea, and prepare for a flood that would cover the entire earth. Noah, a man described as righteous in his generation, began the monumental task. For decades, some say up to 120 years, Noah and his family worked on this enormous vessel. Can you imagine the ridicule they faced? The mockery from neighbors who saw them building a ship where there was no water? The skepticism from a world that had grown comfortable with its wickedness? During this time, the Nephilim continued their reign of terror. They grew bolder, more violent, more assured of their invincibility. After all, who could challenge beings of such immense power? What force on earth could stand against them? The irony is profound. While giants strutted across the earth believing themselves invincible, one faithful man was preparing humanity's only hope for survival. The meek were about to inherit the earth, quite literally. The Bee of Reckoning. But there came a day when the foundations of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven opened. Rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, without ceasing. Rivers overflowed, seas advanced, and the entire earth was covered with waters. Picture that moment, the first drops of rain falling on a world that perhaps hadn't seen such weather before. The initial confusion, then growing alarm as the water didn't stop. The panic as rivers began to swell beyond their banks. The Nephilim, who had seemed indestructible, finally met the limit of their strength. Neither their stature nor their power could resist the fury of the flood. The ancient world disappeared, and with it, the giants who had defied the heavens. What must have gone through their minds in those final moments? These beings who had terrorized humanity for generations, who had considered themselves above natural law, suddenly found themselves helpless against the rising waters. All their strength, all their knowledge, all their cruelty, rendered meaningless by the judgment of the Almighty. The waters rose higher and higher, covering first the valleys, then the hills, and finally even the highest mountains. No fortress could provide shelter, no weapon could fight back the flood, no giant could swim against the divine tide. The silence after the storm. When the waters finally receded, silence covered the earth. The mighty giants were gone. The warriors of renown had fallen. The terror that had gripped humanity for generations was no more. Only 8 souls survived in the ark: Noah and his wife, their 3 sons and their wives. From this small remnant, humanity would begin again. But the world they emerged into was vastly different from the one that had been destroyed. The violence was gone. The giants who had corrupted the earth lay buried beneath layers of sediment. The oppression that had characterized the antediluvian world was no more. Humanity had been given a second chance. Yet even in this new beginning, shadows of the old world remained in human memory, preserved in stories, legends, and warnings passed down through generations. The mystery that remains, after the flood, there are still enigmatic reports of giants in Canaan, such as the descendants of Anak and the famous Goliath defeated by David. This raises the question, were the Nephilim totally destroyed, or did their descendants somehow survive? Some scholars suggest that the corruption hadn't been completely eliminated, that somehow the genetic line continued through one of Noah's family members. Others propose that the term Nephilim was later applied to any group of extraordinarily large or violent people, creating confusion between the original antediluvian giants and later human populations. The Bible doesn't give all the answers, but it leaves traces that intrigue scholars and believers to this day. What we know is that the Great Flood was not just a judgment against humanity, but also the end of a dark era marked by corruption, violence, and unfathomable mysteries. Could it be that these later giants were merely echoes of the original Nephilim? Genetic memories expressing themselves in occasional individuals? Or were they something else entirely? Perhaps the result of humanity once again choosing the path of violence and corruption. Lessons from the deep. The story of the Nephilim reminds us of something very current. When humanity abandons God's principles and seeks only power, pleasure, and violence, the result is destruction. The flood was not just an ancient event, but also a warning for all times. Think about our modern world. Do we not see echoes of antediluvian corruption? The powerful preying upon the weak, violence celebrated as entertainment, the strong using their advantages to oppress rather than protect, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge without regard for consequences. The Nephilim represent more than just physical giants. They symbolize the spiritual giants of pride, violence, and corruption that can grow in any society when moral boundaries are abandoned. They remind us that no one, no matter how powerful they seem, is beyond the reach of divine justice. The final question. Every civilization faces a choice. Will it follow the path of the Nephilim, using power to corrupt and destroy? Or will it choose the path of Noah, remaining faithful even when surrounded by a world gone mad? The floodwaters have receded, but the choice remains. In every generation, in every society, in every human heart, the same decision must be made. Will we choose righteousness or corruption? Will we use our strength to protect or to destroy? Will we humble ourselves before the Almighty? Or will we, like the Nephilim, believe ourselves to be above divine law? The giants fell because they forgot that all power comes from above, and all power can be taken away by the one who gave it. Their story serves as both warning and hope. Warning of what happens when we choose the path of corruption, and hope that no matter how dark the world becomes, righteousness can still find favor with God. The earth was cleansed once by water. The promise is that it will be cleansed again by fire. The question is not whether judgment will come. The question is which side we will be on when it does. So I ask you, have you ever heard of the Nephilim before? Were they just legends, or did they really exist and walk among humans before the flood? What lessons does their story hold for our own time? And most importantly, if you had lived in the antediluvian world, would you have chosen to enter the ark with Noah? Or would you have remained outside with the giants, believing in your own power until the very end? The choice that faced humanity then is the same choice that faces us now. The only question is, what will you choose?